No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on today's episode, I want to talk about a Washington Post article that's pretty cool. It's called Gen Z is Bringing Back the Part-Time Job. And it's interesting because, when I was growing up, the idea of not having a job basically within weeks of turning 16 meant that I, couldn't buy a car or afford to drive my car. I couldn't go out and have, kind of spending money to have fun with friends. I couldn't have a pager, if you remember what those are. Like my parents provided for me the things that I needed, but that included a ride to the places I needed to be at, not my kind of own independence. And so that kind of idea of not having a job wouldn't be okay with me at the time. Over time, that changed. And it seemed like, over, a period of a few decades, the idea of a person working in their teens dropped pretty precipitously. In fact, the information, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, say that 44% of teenagers had a job even as recently as 2004, and that dropped to 34%. So a 30% drop by about 2010, 2012. And that's a pretty substantial enough drop where there have to be reasons for this. And so, as a leadership podcast, as teens are joining the workforce at higher rates now than they were over the last decade, that means a lot for leaders and what it means to lead people like that. Have you thought about this or seen an uptick in these people applying for jobs recently?
Not personally, kind of under 18. I've seen an uptick, like going out socially, going
Sure.
places and seeing employees and being like, I don't think they're over 18. Because it stands out to a degree. And
Right.
I think you expect to see it in some places. I mean, like, look, I had a paper route when I was like 12. I thought I
Right.
was making
Same.
millions, right? And then I got into my uncle's catering company and washed dishes on most summers. And I got my first job at McDonald's. I think I was 15.
Wow.
And so like, to your point, like there was just a part of like getting jobs during the summer, figuring out ways to kind of make money and things like that. And it's been a while, but definitely recently, you go into some place, you kind of expect to see like a family owned business, small business. You might see the kids in there. I see a lot of like smoothie shops or small like ice cream shops where
Right.
like clearly like it's a local owner and it's probably like their kids, their cousins, something like that. But I think more and more in the workforce, I've been seeing it more and more out there. I haven't seen it a lot just yet in retail, personally, but it would not surprise me based upon how much hiring was going on kind of coming out of 2020, where there were a lot of jobs that were available and people were having a hard time filling those jobs. So
Yeah.
I could definitely see where there would be an opportunity there for people to kind of step in and be under 18 and be able to pick up some work.
Right. Clearly the drop that occurred between roughly 2006 and 2012 is predominantly economy based, right? And so in an economic downturn, everybody is looking for work, and there was a lot of high unemployment. And when it's tough to find any job, a lot of people will take jobs that are 1 or 2 or 3 levels below the skill set they have. And so if you're a business owner, why would you hire somebody who's 16 when you can hire somebody who's 25 for the same money who has years of experience, because the economy is saying they're out of options. And it's unfortunate, but that's really what drove it. And then you're right. I think a lot of the recovery from a standpoint of the number of teenagers looking for jobs is rooted in a lot of employers are finding it very difficult to fill some of these jobs. And if you're finding it difficult to fill a job, then you start to, widen your search criteria a little bit. And eventually you get to the point where you will hire somebody with 0 work experience, and somebody who's not yet an adult. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love the idea of a person, working if it's to gain experience and to, build some work ethic and to be able to prioritize things. That's a really good thing, I think, for anybody who's growing up and trying to learn how to, kind of live through the world. But it means a lot from a leadership standpoint. I remember leading teams of people where there were some people on the team under the age of 18 and then many who were over. And it requires different leadership, not just from a legal standpoint. I mean, clearly there are laws in place that prevent certain job duties or the amount of hours that can be spent for a person who's under 18. But there's also some things that you have to realize will be a part of that because of the nature of it, that wouldn't necessarily be there if your team was wholly comprised of adults.
I'm with you. Like, I like the idea for sure. I was just thinking back as you were talking to like being a teen and having those jobs.
Right.
And then like, what did I need from my leader at that point? And then what were the leaders that I think did a really nice job with that? And I think the leaders that did a good job with that were kind of used to having that kind of workforce, and they understood that a lot of times, being a teenager, having that first job, kind of having some level of responsibility, that you're learning a lot of things, not just like the specific parts of what the job is and what you need to do it correctly, but social nuance. I grew up in retail, so like customer service and how do you talk to customers and how like you're learning a lot of these things. And those leaders always had a lot of patience, or they were kind of like giving me more responsibility, which I appreciated because that was like a level of like trust that was there. So I think that there is this element where if you're a leader and you're working for organizations, and this is something that you're starting to see, or that we should all kind of start to expect to see a little bit more, then it really is going to come down to having not just empathy, but because I think it's going to require, I think patience is the right word, and an understanding that a lot of times, if these are the first jobs, there's life lessons here, and
Right.
and they're tough life lessons, because sometimes they do something stupid at work, sometimes they show up late, sometimes they do things where now you have to hold somebody accountable, and then their parents want to jump in because like they're under 18. Well, my Chris would never do that. Chris, I drop him off every day 20 minutes early, and so I know he's been to work on time. And you say like, well, yeah, but Chris walks down to the gas station and hangs out with his friends for 30 minutes and then shows up late. Like these are things that just having to really reach into that to that toolbox to really be prepared for that type of a workforce, I think is going to be really important.
Right. I remember being a 20-year-old kind of department supervisor and having receiving a phone call that an employee was not going to be there to work that day because they were ill. And the phone call came from the mother of the employee, not for the employee themselves. And they were 16, and it was their first job, and they'd been with the company for, probably, a few months. And I was taken aback by it and kind of didn't know how to respond in the moment. I just said, well, can I speak to them? And the mom said, no, he's sleeping right now. We're gonna let him sleep. And I said, okay. And then I hung up and had to kind of partner with a leader of mine. It's like, what? I'd never experienced that before, like that actually happening. And they said, yeah, I mean, for the most part, we want to speak to the employee themselves. But at the end of the day, if they push it, then ultimately it's your decision as to whether or not you want to risk losing an employee who is good. So if they're a good employee, then at some point in time there's a certain amount you have to be able to tolerate. And if they're not a good employee, then you can hold them to the letter of the law and make sure that you talk to them specifically unless they are truly unable to speak. And so that was kind of an interesting thing for me. It's the only time it's ever happened, but I imagine it does happen often. And so these are the kind of things that you have to think about as a leader. What are the things that you, I don't want to say willing to tolerate, but what are the things that you will encounter that will lead you to really consider, okay, what are the pros and cons of doing this? And at the end of the day, just because it doesn't fit right within your kind of paradigm of how things should work, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Oftentimes you have to kind of expand what you are capable of accepting in order to get the best people who are able to work for you for the wage you're paying and that they want to be there. And so kind of thinking about the work that they do when they are there probably becomes the most important part, not necessarily how it all of the time gets done.
Yeah, and like I kind of like I like the fact that this is something that's happening, that we're seeing an increase in this, because I think that like fast forward into like the larger workforce, right? Regardless of the reasons as to why maybe a teenager is looking for a job. What comes out of having a job, I think, is good in general for everyone, so long as it's a good, healthy environment for them to work within. Because you could see it the other way around as well. Is that I'm sure that there are companies, organizations, leaders, and people that will do the wrong things here. I think there was even some data in the article about some companies that are, illegally scheduling teens to work late and long hours and operate dangerous equipment. Like, unfortunately, that's going to happen. But I think from a leadership standpoint, now think about the fact that in an interview process, and again, some leaders may do this all the time. It's something that I have not experienced in many years myself, but like interviewing somebody for the first job they ever had. I can only imagine, like, thinking back on my interview at McDonald's. That was like, well, why do you want to work here? Because, like, I'd like to get a paycheck, and, like, I'm just thinking of, like, I want to be responsible and I have integrity and I'll show up for work every day. Like, it was just like, will I come and do I have do I shake your hand? Do I look you in the eye? Do I make promises on how I'm going to show up for this job? But there are things there where that's going to be something that is how are you assessing for not just their willingness to want to work hard, but what are the skills or the competence or what are the things that they're bringing that you can assess that have nothing to do with having previous work experience. And so I think that that's going to be something as well that if you are out of practice with this, that you may want to take a look at to better understand. If you can't say, like, tell me about a time when you had this challenging situation at work. Well, this is my first job. I don't have any, like,
Right.
then it's like, okay, school. All right. Well, like how do you make these transitions to make sure that you are getting, the best possible quality candidates that you can get, even though this may be their first job they've ever had.
Right. And when I think back to the times where I've done this before, and it's honestly, it's not just people who are under the age of 18. It's just really anybody who is, let's call it 16 to 23 and looking for their very first job, right? They don't have any experience before. And oftentimes, they don't have any answers to the questions from a standpoint of tell me about a time, but there are things you can do to figure out their level of conscientiousness. Like, will they be a good coworker to their peers? Will they fit within a team structure? Will they understand that the world doesn't revolve around them, but that each person is the main character of their own play and everybody else is a supporting character? And you have to go in with that knowledge as you navigate just kind of the idiosyncrasies of working with other people. I can tell you the people I know who are adults who had jobs when they were younger, they are, in general, more willing to work with other people and more willing to compromise and more willing to kind of, get through situations together as a team, kind of figuring out that, the give and take of that. And the people that I know who, really didn't work at all until they were, already, in their late 20s or early 30s because they were just, going to school the entire time. Oftentimes those people have a harder time figuring out how to work within teams of people. And so, yeah, if you can, as a leader, support the idea of a person getting some experience and kind of working with them, I think it's a win-win for everybody because it will kind of pave the way for some really talented, kind of junior and senior leaders in the coming, call it 5 to 20 years. These are going to be people that are leading teams of people, large teams of people in a very short period of time. And so the earlier they can, kind of launch, I think the better.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. Understand that it's probably easier to cut the slack needed to assume the positive intent and to kind of meet people where they are and work with them, the younger they are and the less experience they have, because you don't approach the relationship with certain expectations that are rooted in your own assumptions of what their life experience or abilities or age may be. And so as you lead your teams of people, new people will come on the team, regardless of their age. Think about the way that you would approach the situation if you knew the person was 17 or 18 years old and it was their first job, and how you would meet them where they are and work with them. Apply that same criteria to anybody who is new on your team. A person who's new to the team, you don't know what their life experience is. You don't know what their work experience is from a practical standpoint, just what it says on the resume. So when you're giving feedback and you're expecting things out of these people, work with them in a way that says that you don't expect more out of them than what they've already shown you they're capable of doing. Work with them to help them get better at the things that they are not doing well at, and approach feedback from a standpoint of assuming that they were doing the best that they could, and then look at how they respond to that feedback and make changes going forward, not at whether or not they needed the feedback to begin with. I think we could all use a little of that kind of gut check on how we lead teams of people, and sometimes maybe not cutting people the slack or assuming the positive intent that they deserve, regardless of their age or generation or what the job they're doing is.
I like that a lot. It's kind of situational leadership 101. Matt assume the task, or if somebody's new to a task, that they're going to need some good amount of direction and support. And when you have people join your team, again, they may bring an element of experience and background and capabilities, but it's better to be curious up front and best to understand what they know, what they don't know, what they might need help with, and create that relationship in such a way from the beginning that they don't have to get into kind of that space of like fake it till you make it type of deal. And that can be super helpful. Those that this is their first job, like, the ones that will figure it out the quickest are the ones who are going to ask the most amount of questions, because they're going to understand, oh, if I can get the answer and do it the right way the first time, this will make my life significantly easier. But for those that, when people get new jobs and they join new teams, there's always kind of this initial assumption of like, I need to prove why I'm here. I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm doing. And that can be difficult. So I like that hack a lot.
Right. And the last thing that I want to say about this, and I think it is imperative if you're a leader of people who are really, under the age of 30, probably at this point, the instances of people being raised by parents who use the words just because or because I said so has dropped and continues to drop. It's at an all-time low. It just doesn't happen very much anymore. And so be prepared for questions on why someone is being asked to do something. It doesn't mean that your leadership is being challenged. It doesn't mean that they think that you're full of it or that you don't have the authority to do this. It means that they have spent their entire life being able to ask why something is the way that it is and being given a legitimate answer by teachers, by parents, by everybody. It's you can't take somebody like that and then start saying just because or because I said so, or expect them to understand why something is being asked of them inherently. You have to explain it to them. And if you don't explain it well enough, they will ask. Be prepared to answer those questions when asked in a sincere way, so that they can connect what they're being asked to do to the overall mission of the business, because they will need that in order to do good work for you.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.